Welcome to Next Level with Greg and Tommy. Looks like a podcast, looks like the format we've all used. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. That's Greg Barnes. Everything seems normal. This is not normal. This is new. This is Next Level. Greg Barnes, help me introduce this new YouTube show, Inside Carolina's first YouTube show, something different, something for the fans, a little bit deeper than a podcast, a little bit more able for Greg Barnes to show his chops in the research area. Greg, just sort of share the thoughts here and share what we're trying to do here as we get it rolling.
Well, Tommy, you've been a huge part of the IC podcast programming over the last, 15 years now. And IC has just done a great job. We have a very unique lineup. And podcasts are really opportunities for a group of people to get online and share thoughts about certain topics. A lot of time we're talking about either just the basketball team, how they just played or how they're about to play, projections, all those kinds of things. It really gives you an opportunity to kind of branch out and I don't want to say ramble, but kind of ramble. This is kind of what we do is you just kind of a free exchange of ideas. But when you look on the message boards, a lot of what we get occasionally in random threads is, hey, what about this? What happened in 2017 when this went wrong with the defense? We had a long conversation about that recently, about how injuries really affected the 2017 team. Why were there so many injuries? And so we were able to get into, okay, well, look, because they were building the indoor practice complex, they couldn't use Navy fields. That's 3 fields that UNC did not have access to. And so we really dove into how, because so many different teams had to use Kenan Stadium, it really tore up the field. North Carolina had to do different things to kind of get in there and fix it. And it posed problems. And it posed problems for injuries and those kinds of things as well. So this is an opportunity, this YouTube show, to really dive into specifics, because there's just so many random questions that people come up with and want to know about that either is happening right now or has transpired over the years, where we don't need necessarily a whole podcast just on that one topic. But in this setting, we can really branch out and really kind of dive down deep and talk about unique things and talk about, if you want to talk about unique years, unique situations. We covered a lot of the NCAA investigation and the fallout there. There's questions about how some of that stuff transpired. All these things we want to get to, and we want to provide an opportunity for our subscribers and for our listeners and readers and watchers to say, I've always wondered about this particular thing. How does that factor into what North Carolina is doing right now? And so the opportunity here, Tommy, is really to get very specific in what we're talking about and really dive down and try to kind of peel back the layers and give people a good idea of what really happened or what really is behind this trend. And with NIL coming out, with the transfer portal becoming such a big deal, there's a lot of new things that we can tackle. And so this is just an opportunity to really provide the readers an opportunity to ask questions and for us to take a real long, deep look at it.
Yeah, and it's also timing, right? Greg Barnes, of course, Inside Carolina people watching this episode know that Greg has been on the Inside Carolina beat for 15 plus years. And that involves countless hours of covering the team, the current team, and what's going on right then. But if you've noticed in the last few months, Adam Smith's taken over that main role along with Ross Martin, and Greg's had the opportunity to sort of drill down on some article and some written formats on Inside Carolina and look at issues a little deeper. And that's just another form of this podcast. YouTube show. It'll take me a while to get used to that one. The YouTube show that where we can do, as Greg said, look into things more in depth and sort of get some commentary, some information, some research done on things that maybe weren't possible as Greg was on the beat. And so, first of all, what I want folks to do is to understand Greg Barnes, the beat writer, versus Greg Barnes, the Inside Carolina contributor. And I'm going to let you explain it because all I know is I need my Greg Barnes fix. And that's part of the reason I'm here. But not only that, to learn more from Greg and to be a part of Greg being able to share what his experience has brought to this readership and this viewership.
Well, as Tommy mentioned, Adam Smith has taken over the beat role, and he's doing a fantastic job. And Ross is doing Ross things. And so, in terms of the day-to-day coverage, those are your guys to follow. And as Tommy said, I was fortunate to be on the beat for 15 years. And even though I'm officially off the beat, this program, or this athletic department, is still very present in kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so this is really just an opportunity to kind of branch out and do unique things. This would have been really fun to do while on the beat. It's just really not feasible, because the idea is to be able to get questions from readers and spend a couple hours really kind of digging into something and providing you sharp feedback. So you're not kind of like, well, I think this happened or that. We can actually provide it as kind of in a research form of saying, all right, well, we've gone through this. This is what happened. This is the answer to this question. And so we don't kind of get off on these wild tangents. And that's a unique opportunity for me. As you said, Tommy, I have done some of the PFF stuff. I like that a lot. I'm able to focus on columns, doing some long form writing. Should have a really good one on Jonas Schration coming out pretty soon that I think everybody will like. And beyond the podcast work, this was a unique opportunity to really branch out and provide IC with a YouTube show, because the podcasts are great. I mean, keep listening. It's a very unique medium, but we think now that we have so much visual media, this opportunity just is sitting there waiting for somebody to take it, and we thought this was a good opportunity.
Indeed. And to make this more reader and watcher friendly, we want your topic suggestions. We want your questions. We get them off the message boards all the time. What we'll talk about today has been the talk of the last couple of days at Inside Carolina. But send me topics. Send me something you want Greg Barnes to dig into. Tommy at InsideCarolina.com, Greg at InsideCarolina.com, or hit us up on Twitter, the message boards, whatever. We'll have a thread. But this is this is a way for the reader and for you guys, the Inside Carolina subscriber, to really get involved and to find out information you want to know. Look, there's been plenty of times that I've wanted to know scoop that I didn't know in my role, and I've been able to get it. So we want you to be able to get it. You want to know what happened, like Greg said, in 2010 when things were going sideways? Submit a question or a discussion point, and we'll try to look into it and get it to you in a way for you to understand a little bit deeper of what goes into everything.
Yeah, the other aspect of it too is, because of how our podcast system's set up, we have multiple contributors. We have former players. We have Jason Sables, who does a lot of the X's and O's and breakdowns. So we have multiple people typically on each podcast. And that kind of limits a little bit what you can do in terms of covering the entire ACC with other personnel. And Tommy got a lot of positive feedback with his was that a podcast? Was that a YouTube stream, Tommy, with the Miami host?
I actually did. One of them was their YouTube podcast, and then the other one I did on game day was a live YouTube stream for their radio team. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. And Tommy got a lot of positive feedback about that. So we're also going to branch out in that regard too, of when they're not necessarily like a preview for every game. We've got other avenues for that. But just if there's a big game coming up and there are two programs that are in the mix, what's going on the other side? And so this is an opportunity to bring in some outside voices, maybe for some other teams, and kind of pick their mind a little bit on where that team that they cover stands, how it applies to North Carolina, and then also for the ACC as a whole. With expansion being such a big conversation of late, we're going to try to get some ACC national type media to discuss where does UNC stand in all this? How do things play out 5 years, 10 years down the road? What is the ACC doing, trying to address some of these revenue deficiencies when you compare it to the SEC and the Big Ten? So a lot of different avenues we're going to try to take with this. But the entire point is we want to make it very singularly focused, where we can really dive down and kind of peel back the layers and share as much as we can with as much detail as we can.
Yep, and it's a YouTube channel, a YouTube show at Inside Carolina's YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe to that. If we pop up live, we could pop up live. You need to be subscribed so you get alerts. We'll do our best to let you know what's going on. But to Greg's point about the Miami deal, it is very interesting that fan bases and reporters and all, they're not much different. The uniform colors are different than that they cover. Now, I understand that there may be some hard feelings on local teams coverage or whatever, but in reality, those guys are much like Greg, myself, Ross, and Adam. They're covering a team and they want to provide the best information. And so we'll try to, over the course of the seasons, bring you all that information and get that take from the other side. It's cool. It is neat to hear what people think of North Carolina, not through the blue tinted glasses, as they always say. And so that's what we'll do. And again, on the national scale, it should be a fun time. It should be a great show. And this is episode 1. So it will get better. We will have some cool graphics. We will have everything you possibly need. And like I said, get involved. Let us know what you want to know about, and we'll do our best. That brings me to our topic today. Speaking of national press, Carolina Greg was AP #1, I believe, for the 10th time in school's history. A fascinating stat. Everybody said S State, they're one more than Duke. First of all, your take on that. I think it's a big deal. The Sports Illustrated cover, I must say, that was classic. That was some solid work by Carolina basketball and whoever is directly responsible for putting that together. But your take on that as we branch towards this AP poll, all ACC teams, and all that in this first episode.
Well, just really a tribute to Hubert Davis and what he's been able to do, and to Roy Williams. I mean, Roy Williams, pushed Hubert Davis from day one, and that was who he kind of had anointed as his what's the word I'm looking for, Tommy? Not as a protege, but as
The
next
heir.
in line, the heir. There you go.
Heir to the
And
throne, if we're going to keep the
yeah,
Game of
right.
Thrones thing.
And you can go back to February 14th. Let's go back to Valentine's Day of this year. And I don't know that any of us really thought that North Carolina was going to be in a situation where they were going to be #1 in the country in the preseason poll. And for what Hubert did really the last month and a half of the season was just phenomenal. And the fact that so many of those guys got to the national championship game, had a 16-point lead, were just so close to winning that title, and yet elected to come back. Really, really speaks volumes. The fact that they were able to get Pete Nance in, who's a little bit different player than Brady Manick, but does a lot of the same things. And so kind of a plug and play type deal. But it just really is a testament to Hubert Davis and the national respect that he's garnered, because I think throughout the course of the all season, people were looking at different teams trying to figure out, okay, who do we think? We know these teams are probably the top 5, right? Who's #1? And as we got closer to the season, the more I talked with people, around the triangle and around the country, it became pretty clear that we're pretty sure North Carolina is the team. And that's, as you said, 10 times. That's pretty impressive. You're beating Duke yet again. I mean, Carolina's got to loosen up a little bit, Tommy. It's gotten pretty rough on Duke late.
If you count Wallace Wade Stadium last Saturday night,
Yeah.
it's in all at all angles. Carolina, the assault on the Duke mystique, I guess we can call it. Greg, when you look at this team, and you mentioned February 14th, and we're going to get into this season, but I do want to look back just a little bit to get your perspective. Now that you've stepped away from it, I mean, you've covered this team a lot, and I've been watching Carolina basketball and all for decades, far too many. This team was left for dead, and yet the same group of guys, minus maybe if you want to say Dawson Garcia left, and maybe him leaving the team sort of helped, but this basically the same group of guys went from left for dead, really on the national trash heap. If you go back and can pull all these podcasts and these YouTube shorts and these radio shows from back there, especially after they lost to Pitt, nobody thought this team could do anything. And the same group of guys, I know that I have never seen, especially Carolina, I've never seen anything like the turnaround we saw.
Yeah, I can't think of one. And specifically the NCAA tournament run, Tommy, I've covered a lot of them. And 08, everybody knew Carolina was really good. And so it wasn't a surprise, even though they hadn't been to the Final Four during Tyler's time. That was special. Everybody expected to win in 09. We know how 2012 went. 2016 was special. but North Carolina again, they were up there. I think they were a 1 seed that year, right? And then the redemption tour the next year. So there's been a lot of good runs, but for North Carolina to do what they did last year, and for them to have the turnaround they did after that Pittsburgh game, I'll never forget Hubert after that game. Everybody made a big deal right about after the Wake loss about the players came in, they were expecting a really hard practice, and Hubert's kind of put his arm around them and encouraged them and said, "Hey, it's okay. You know what? We have bad days. We're going to get better." Uh, and that really didn't seem that probably helped, but it didn't flip the switch. After Pittsburgh, though, he got hold of them and said, "Look, guys, you're playing harder in practice than you are against Pittsburgh on live national TV in front of the fan base. Something's not right here." And from that point forward, the guys turned it on. And for them to close the way they did was quite phenomenal. What really stood out to me, and I'll have a column on this coming up in the next couple of weeks, look at the individual growth. RJ Davis went from a combo guard who was solid and a little bit undersized to being a dog, right? I mean, I think you can put him in the Joel Berry frame of reference in terms of just a smaller guy who's scrappy, who can knock down big shots when you need him to. He became that point guard. Leaky Black, confidence, I think, was an issue for him for a long time. A lot of that was because of injury. He also talked about how anxiety had gotten to him. And I think getting that off his chest really, really helped him. But the player he became, people say he's one of the best defenders in the country. Come on. Who's better than him? Nobody. He is the best defender in the country, bar none. And then Armando Bacot, early in his career, when he was on, he was really good. But then he had those days where he just kind of vanished. He got pushed around a little bit. He became the constant late in the year. Day in, day out, you knew what you're going to get from him. And then Brady really kind of stepped into his role too. So the individual growth combined with the team chemistry aspect of it, really coming together and playing for one another, took this team from really off the bubble after that Pitt game to closing the season. And if Bacot stays healthy, if Brady doesn't suffer, if it wasn't a concussion, it was close to a concussion, and then Caleb got dinged up. If those things don't happen, they win the national championship. I'm convinced of that. And so just an incredible job by the team and by Hubert the last 6-7 weeks of the year.
Yeah, it is a testament to Hubert Davis keeping the focus and staying on course to be able to do it. And that New Orleans Superdome, just unbelievable atmosphere. And you're right. If all three of those things don't happen, and we're talking about a defending national champion on this show here, but they did. Carolina lost. Kansas, the national champion. It's funny. I feel like the Kansas team is sort of like the Jeff Capel shot, right? Everybody thinks Carolina won the national championship, and Kansas is sort of afterthought. Here we are, North Carolina, heading into a season where 7 months ago, left for dead. Now preseason number one in AP poll. But Greg, also preseason ACC pick. There was very little doubt of that was going to be the case. Let me ask you a question from a media standpoint. Explain to folks just briefly how this works, how these votes work, and then we can dive into the teams right fast. But, when you've got 15 basketball teams, very few sports writers are up to date on all 15. Just in a nutshell, how do these votings work from what you've seen over the last 15, 16 years?
Well, here's the secret, right? The preseason awards, anybody can vote in them. If you cover a team in the ACC in some form or fashion, you get a vote. Why? Because every conference, not just the ACC, whether it be football or basketball, they want preseason hype, preseason media, preseason content, because that pumps up the conference and that gives them exposure. That's all they want. That's it. What happens with the postseason awards is the ACC becomes very selective. I'm trying to think what it is. I think it was 3 from each team. So it's typically me, 2 other writers, and then somebody from UNC. I believe that's correct. Would cover the UNC who covered the UNC beat, our votes would go with 3 or 4 from each other team, and we would be the ones that actually picked the end of year awards. So that's a very concentrated group of people who cover the teams day in and day out and who have a good idea. The preseason stuff, I mean, it could be random guys who have a radio show in West Virginia. I mean, seriously, it could be some wild, crazy stuff, and that's just to get media exposure. So the preseason awards aren't always very accurate, but it's also people tend to say, okay, well, let's find a preview online. Who do we respect? Well, let's see what he's got to say. And that's kind of how a lot of this stuff is shaped. So, yes, everybody knew that it was either going to be Carolina or Duke for good reason. After that, is really kind of a free-for-all. So, it's a good thing. Don't take it too seriously. And I think that's the best way to phrase it, Tommy.
What is funny to me about that too is everybody's vote in preseason counts the same, whether it's somebody with a internet show that voting or it's Greg Barnes. It counts the same in these preseason votes, and so don't get too torqued up. You can go and find the history of these things. That they are very rarely right. But Greg, I must be remiss, and props to Joey Powell on the Coast to Coast and mentioning it as well. On the most recent podcast that's on Inside Carolina, Armando Bacot, 100 out of 101 preseason first team All ACC. Greg, I understand what you just said, but in what planet do we live on that Armando Bacot's not unanimous? It doesn't matter a bit. It doesn't matter in the end. But come on, man. One person doesn't have this guy on their top 5 in the ACC.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and I assume that's just somebody trying to be a contradictory voice, right? Contrarian, and
something like that.
There's always somebody like that that's trying to get some attention some way, somehow.
Let's look at the teams. Of course, Carolina, number 1, all the way down to Georgia Tech, number 15, Josh Pastner. I mean, hey, to his credit, he said Carolina was a Final Four team way back in January, I believe it was. So he was right about that. Coaching basketball, not terribly too much. Duke 2, Virginia 3, Miami 2nd. When you're looking at this preseason poll, Greg, in your mind, first blush, how wrong is it or how right is it in your opinion?
Yeah, I think on the whole it's pretty solid. I really think BC should probably be a lot higher, and not because I think they're going to be world beaters, but I think the fact that I think they did a pretty good job in year one, and I think it's a situation they've got a couple new additions that should help, but they've got some returners who were solid. I mean, the Langford boys were pretty good. Mason Madsen from Cincinnati is the guy they think can step in and really kind of flesh out the lineup a little bit. And when you compare that with some of these other teams, I mean, Georgia Tech's a mess. I mean, they were bottom of the league last year essentially and lost their 2 top scorers. That's the problem. I don't see how Pastner's kept his job as long as he has. He's a great guy. I enjoy talking to him. Jeff Capel, like his whole thing was supposed to be recruiting. That hasn't happened. He hasn't posted a good year really anytime. I know he's gotten a hold of Carolina a couple times. Louisville, Kenny Payne, I think it was a good hire, but he didn't do anything in this offseason. It's like he didn't bring anybody in, which I don't get. Clemson, they don't have any guards. They have PJ Hall. I don't think he's going to be back maybe until the end of November, early December. They can lose a lot of games before he comes back. So Brad Burnell is a solid coach, not a good recruiter. So he's just kind of mired there. Like, if he can get to 500 in the league, that's pretty much the best that he's going to be able to do with how he recruits. State, I was surprised they kept Kevin Keats, right?
Yeah, how does that happen?
I have no idea.
11 and 21 last year?
Yeah. Tre'Quavius Smith, yes, he's going to be really good, I think. I think he's a guy that's going to be scoring 25, 30 a game. But guess what? He's about all they got. He's got to, right? I don't think they're going to be any good. And then Syracuse, Joe Girard's okay. Jesse's back. I know he got hurt late last year and they had a good run. Boeheim's probably about time for him to retire. And so that's a large segment of the ACC that's just not any good. And then when you get past that, so I think BC will be better than some of those teams. Wake, a lot of people are expecting Forbes just to be able to replace Londus Williams and Jake LaRavia. And yeah, he's got some guys coming in. The Appleby kid from Florida, he didn't do anything at Florida. And so there's banking on some of these guys popping. And Williamson was good last year. He'll probably be their best player. I don't know what else they have. Virginia Tech will be solid. And then once you get into, Miami, Notre Dame, I think those would be pretty good teams that could beat Carolina on a given night if they get hot. I do think Virginia, they return everybody. They're going to be great defensively. They've got to find somebody who can shoot the ball. And then you get into the other teams that I think can actually contend for the title, being Carolina, Duke, and Florida State.
How much is being old help Carolina? I mean, we talked forever that teams were being led by freshmen and sophomores, and it was just a different brand of basketball. And now here you have COVID and everything that's come around, and NIL especially. I'd love to. I just think this team looks completely different. North Carolina looks completely different without NIL. But how much of that experience for North Carolina is going to be a difference, in your opinion, here in 2020, 22, 23?
A ton. I mean, because this team really didn't have this group of players had not had a lot of success until last postseason. It just clicked for them. And so the hope is that they can build on that, right? And they've gone through some very tough times. I mean, the 2019-2020 season was very poor. I mean, that team was picked pretty high in the preseason ACC standings and finished at the bottom. And Leakey, of course, was on that team. So I think having the experiences and then tasting the success of the NCAA tournament, and even within games, right? I mean, the Baylor game, where you're smacking the number 1 seed, and then you get lucky that you don't lose in regulation. I mean, the way that game shifted was phenomenal. It was incredible. And then to pull it out and then to close out the way that they did and get into the championship game, that really allows them, I think, to say, okay, we have all this experience. We played in this many games. We've had postseason success. Now we understand what it takes. We understand there will be good nights and bad nights, but our level of play can't drop. You can't play bad because your effort's not there. In other words, you're going to miss shots. Other teams are going to get hot. But if your level of play there with the experience and the talent that you have, that really should carry you through. I mean, every team at this point is going to lose games. You have the occasional team that goes undefeated and they get in the NCAA tournament and eventually lose. You're going to lose some games, but why you lost and how you deal with that loss, I think is kind of the key thing. And that's going to be the test for Hubert Davis, is getting these guys to understand what they have and how they can capitalize on it.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things is if you're not scoring the basketball, do something else. And we've talked about that forever at Inside Carolina, is you cannot be a drain on your team if you're shooting 1 for 10. And I think maybe Caleb Love learned that the most last year, is that do something else. Rebound the basketball, play some defense and all. And I think that's a big, huge jump. Bryce Johnson used to be terrible about that. And then his junior and senior year, he sort of took off when he figured it out. Leaky Black can never score basketball the entire game, and he can be the best player on the floor or the most influential player on the floor. And I think we'll see that. You mentioned that 2020 season. Carolina was picked second in the ACC. Is that right? And they finished last.
Yeah.
And so preseason polls, that's why we were talking about them earlier.
Well, you mentioned Caleb Love, not to bang on him because he was banged up in the NCAA tournament championship game. But he missed 19 shots. And people say, yeah, well, he was hurt. He was trying to help the team win. Exactly. I mean, he was in a situation where he wasn't 100%. So he's got to understand that maybe that's affecting his ability to get good shots and to make good shots. And so at that point, you've got to start distributing a little bit more. And that means other guys have to step up. So if he's the only guy willing to take the shot, that's a problem too. But that's the kind of thing that you have to be in that moment to learn of, okay, I know that if I keep shooting, eventually they're probably going to go in. but I also have to understand there are other guys around me who have come along, and maybe they can help us more than I can right now. And I think a lot of the guys kind of learned that, and that's something that they're going to be able to build on. So the next time they get in that situation, they'll be in better position.
You think who has the most pressure on this team specifically? That we'll say the starting five. I think it's Pete Nance, to be honest with you. Pete Nance is coming in. He's a good player. He's different, and he's going to hear to Brady Manick. We've heard it repeatedly. I think he's got the most pressure because everybody expects him to step in and do what the guy before him did. Is it him or is it one of the guys that's been there?
Well, I think you certainly circle Pete just because of what you said. People are going to expect him to be Brady Manick. Well, he's not Brady Manick. It's a little bit different game. I think if anything, Pete's going to give you, instead of a small ball 5 type guy, he's going to be able to slide in for Baycott and be a good 5 for North Carolina, which means Puff and Dontrez Styles and some of those guys will be able to come in at the 4 and give you good quality minutes. That's how those guys get minutes. Pete can take the outside shot for sure, but he's not going to fill it up like Brady did. I mean, Brady was just a machine the way he came on late in the year. So there are different players. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him. But I think it goes back to Caleb. You know, as I said earlier, I don't think there's any questions whatsoever about R.J. Davis, Leaky Black, and Armando Baycott in terms of who they are, what they can provide, and their consistency. I mean, you've got 3 key guys there that you know what you're going to get out of them pretty much every single night. And so it goes to that 4 position and then to Caleb. And we talked a lot last year, good Caleb, bad Caleb, right? And we want Caleb to be good more frequently, but his bad has got to be less bad, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
You want his off nights to be kind of average, and you can survive that. But playing hero ball is not going to get it done because they don't need that anymore. And I think that's where Hubert Davis and his staff have really got to work. Hopefully they've worked this offseason, and they'll work through the course of the early part of the year and making sure that he understands that.
I think what you just talked about is something that we'll talk about all year. His bad can't be it can't be devastatingly bad, and it
It can't be
can't
5
be
of
detrimental.
24.
Yeah, you can't be national championship bad. He was bad against Syracuse in the Dean Dome last year, but he made shots late. But yeah, he can. He's maybe I'll change it. Maybe I'll take Caleb Love as the guy with the most pressure this year because he's the guy. Also, he's the guy that's going to be the focal point. I remember we talked about Tyler Hansbrough being the guy. And he was the guy, but who was the star of that team? It was one of those guards. So maybe, or it was Tywan Lawson. So maybe R.J. Davis, Caleb Love step up to be the most important guys. But yeah, Caleb is the guy. He cannot kill you with his shooting when he's off, and I think that'll be the biggest difference.
Yeah, and talking about the preseason number 1 pick in the ACC, Tommy, I went back and looked at it. Roy Williams never got enough credit. I'll never understand it, but he never did. But if you look at the times that his Carolina teams, were picked number 1 in the preseason ACC poll, 2007, they won the regular season title. 2008, they won the regular season title. 2009, they won the regular season title. 2010, coming off of that title, they were 9th. Injuries and Larry Drew and all that mess. 2012, they won the regular season title. In 2016, they won the regular season title. So that's 6 out of 7 years with Roy at the helm that North Carolina was a preseason ACC pick, and they ultimately ran through the league. So that bodes pretty well for kind of what we're looking at here. And I don't think there's any question. If it's going to come down to Carolina and Duke, and you talk about the experience of Carolina, John Shire's got a lot of talent over there, but a lot of young guys.
Speaking of young guys, look at the Rookie of the Year voting in the ACC. It's just we're not going to talk about Duke too terribly much, but all 4 Duke freshmen or 4 of the Duke freshmen are the top 4 preseason. You talking about some let's all vote for these guys. Lively, Whitehead, Proctor, Mitchell, Tyler Nickel, and Jalen Washington get 2 votes apiece, and then Seth Trimble's down at 1. But Duke dominates the preseason Rookie of the Year, similar to the way they've dominated the preseason polls in the past. You mentioned Boston College, so I'll take Boston College as maybe your surprise team in the ACC.
Sure.
who's going to be of this list? Who's going to be the team that um, we'll say is looking for a coach at the end of the year because they did not meet expectations?
Oh, there's so many of them, Tommy. Well, Georgia Tech's 15th.
Yeah, you
So they
can't get
can
any worse than that.
they can meet expectations and still lose. I think there's going to be some turnover. I mean, I don't know how Keats keeps his job if State finishes 10th, which I think they probably will. Brunell's he's had 9 lives somehow because he is a solid coach. I mean, he's a good coach. He's just not a good recruiter, and that's just hurt him for so long. I'm surprised Cable's still at Pitt. You're talking about 4 or 5 programs that could see guys go. And Boeheim needs to retire. I think he's kind of past his prime at this point. So I think there'll be a number of teams. And I think I don't know that there's a lot of pressure on Kenny Payne, but I think with the way that he kind of messed up, I guess you would say, the roster this offseason in terms of not bringing guys in, which is just crazy to me. I think he needs to have a decent first year for people to trust that he knows what he's doing.
It is interesting to watch. I saw last year. I mean, the ACC was maybe 5th overall. Do you see, judging from what we've talked about, we're used to ACC basketball being the cream of the crop. How far has it fallen, in your opinion, over the last few years, and why?
Well, I think as coaches for sure. I think you got to have a solid group of coaches to be able to carry the league. And for the most part, you still have that at the top. I think the problem is that there's so many old heads. Boeheim's a good coach. He's kind of past his prime. Mike Bray is getting up there in age. I think he's solid. He's not great. He's the kind of guy that there used to be several of that type where they're always kind of 5 or 6. In a few years, they'd have a really good year and they challenge for the league title. Leonard Hamilton, I think, is a great coach. I think he's the guy that, what is he now? 74, 75? I think he's
you can't tell it.
Yeah, right. He's my parents' age. They're all from the Gastonia area. In Virginia and Florida State's probably my other surprise pick if I want to go over somebody other than BC, just because they had so many injuries last year, and I think they got some good players. But now you've got Hubert at Carolina. Shire's going to go through some rough patches this year, just like Hubert did last year. That's part of it. Tony Bennett, he doesn't age. So you've got a good nucleus there, but we're still waiting to see, is Fisher is Forbes really a good coach? He had a good year last year, and he's shown that he can win other places. Can he do that here? But we're running out of hope with some of these guys, right? Capel, I think he's done. Georgia Tech, Pastner, he's done. Keats should be gone. Brunell's gone. So I think it's very important for the league to make some really good hires. To maybe with this next group of 5 or 6 guys that are going to go out in the next couple of years, make some really good hires, and that will allow the ACC to be better on a national level. Because like last year, there's a number of games where Carolina will go in, and they'll beat a team by 20 or 25, and it won't tell us anything because those teams just were not any good. And the ACC, to your point, used to not be like that. Granted, there used to be only, 8 or 9 teams. So when you get to 15 teams, that changes things quite a bit.
One thing that Boeheim was talking about is the ACC is still king. I mean, look at the Final Four and all that stuff. Is perception from covering these guys for as long as you did and covering teams and being as involved in it and as paying attention the most, does perception matter more than maybe we think, or is it production?
Yeah, perception is very important for sure. And that's the thing. I mean, we can talk about the ACC being solid over the years. We know who the best teams have been. I mean, when Carolina struggles, the ACC struggles. When Duke struggles, the ACC struggles. That was the importance of having Maryland with Gary Williams because they were always pretty good. They may not be elite, but they were really good, and they would factor in and give you some Final Four runs or Elite 8 runs. State used to be like that. It's been a long time. And now Virginia's kind of taken that mold, but Virginia got in that situation where they would win the ACC and then they wouldn't go anywhere in the NCAA tournament. And that actually hurts perception because, wait a minute, the best team in the ACC can't get to the Sweet 16. What's that about? So perception clearly is very important. And with the SEC putting more money into coaching staffs and that league getting better the last couple of years, that's something that the ACC has to be cognizant of. And that's why they got to make some really good hires, even though the attention now has started to shift more so in the ACC than it ever has before to football.
Yeah, that's the thing. The money has gotten unbelievably in expansion and all this stuff, and teams being poached by other conferences. I think ACC basketball needs to step up this year. I mean, when you're talking about them being the fourth or fifth big conference, that just can't be. And I guess maybe I'm just the old man shouting at clouds. But to your point, and this is something that the national people will talk about all year, is from 8 to 15 in the ACC. Save maybe Wake Forest if they can get it together and play well. It's just also rans, and that's just it is what it is at this point. So Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, Miami, Florida State, Notre Dame, they got to carry this conference, and I'm not sure that anybody beyond Carolina, Duke, and Virginia is capable of doing it on a consistent basis. You've been listening to Next Level. Like I mentioned early in this show, this YouTube show, we will attack a lot of different topics over the course of the year. Greg, give me a couple topics that you want to talk about on this show that you think our listeners and watchers will enjoy. Put you on the spot.
Yeah, you are going to put me on the spot. Well, look, the NCAA investigation stuff is always near and dear to my heart just because I spent so many hours toiling over that, right? But really, I think the Mac Brown era is fascinating on different levels. The fact that he was here back in the late 80s to late 90s and the success that he had, why he left, why he came back is always a fascinating story. I think Hubert Davis is a fascinating story. There was people who weren't even sure that he wanted the job before he took it, which is fascinating to me, right? I mean, and then we see what he's done in such a short time. And then there's so many players that have good stories. You talk about Joel Berry. I know a lot of people wanted Kennedy Meeks, to win the MVP that year and all those kind of things for how well he played in the Final Four, and he did, no doubt about it. But to watch Joel Berry fight through what he did in Phoenix with two bum ankles that were, I mean, they looked like 2 8-balls on his feet just because how big and just black they were from being bruised. The way that he played, you never would have guessed it. So what he did that weekend's phenomenal. So there's so many things like that that we can dive into. We can also get into stats and Ken Palm and advanced metrics. I'm always a big fan of those kind of things. So there's all kinds of stuff we can get into, Tommy. Before we sign off, though, I do want to highlight something about North Carolina being the preseason AP #1 team in the country. They have been, as we said, preseason #1 10 times. It's a phenomenal thing, but when you look at the particular years, it bodes well for this year. 1978, so 77, 78. Okay, they got knocked out of the tournament early. Not that great of a year. The next year was 82, won the title. Next year was 84. They probably should have won the title, except for an injury to Kenny Smith.
One of the greatest teams. I'd probably put that team up against any Carolina team ever.
Yeah, I agree.
One of them. Top 2 or 3 totally.
Yeah. 87, I think they lost in the Elite Eight, maybe.
I was there. I saw that one in person. Yeah. Brutal. Syracuse. Jim Boeheim.
Yeah. 94. Okay. That team should not have got knocked out by Curley and his Eagles. It was a fluky win, but that team, there's no question that team was elite, right? They just didn't mesh because of the talent. You had Stackhouse and Wallace and a lot of the old heads with Sullivan and Montross and those guys. 08. That team was probably better than 09, but 08. Final Four team. First Final Four with all 4 #1 seeds. UCLA had Kevin Love and Russell Westbrook on that team, which is phenomenal to me.
Crazy.
Right. 09, of course, won the title. 2012, another team. They may not have been the #1 team by far, but it was Carolina and Kentucky. No doubt about it. And the fact that Henson and Marshall got hurt kind of ruined that. And they still got the Elite Eight without two of their best players. 16, get to the championship game, lose on a heartbreaker. And then this year. So that is a very strong group of North Carolina teams over the last, well, over my lifetime. So 78, I was born the year before. They were all preseason number one. And all those teams were really good. So that bodes well for what this team has in front of it. But that also tells you with only 2 titles in that group, you're asking too much if you're going to get upset if this team doesn't win the title. This team will undoubtedly be one of the best teams in the country. So enjoy the ride. If things break their way and they survive injuries and fluky games like that in the NCAA tournament, they certainly can get back to the title game. But it's going to be a fun year. So hopefully people will enjoy it.
Yeah, winning games is hard. You hear it on all levels of sport. You hear it a ton on the football side. Well, in basketball, you got 40 minutes to handle business. And if another team gets hot, it's over with when you get to the tournament. Hubert Davis, North Carolina, preseason AP number 1, preseason ACC number 1. Armando Bacot, preseason player of the year. Is he the best player on the team? That's a debate we can have all year. I think Caleb Love and RJ Davis especially will have some say in that. That right there is the best player on this show, Greg Barnes. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's Next Level with Greg and Tommy. Send us your request, whatever you need. We will dig into it. YouTube only show, so enjoy it. Check us out. You might see us live. You might not. You might see us pregame, postgame. Who knows? So many opportunities we have here at Inside Carolina. We just want to make sure that you, the reader, the watcher, the listener, is getting the best content that you want. So let us know. Thanks, Greg.